Hi, my name is Ike Ellis, and I'm excited to be here today. I'm going to speak to you today on 11 habits of great SQL developers. To get the boring stuff out of the way, let me tell you a little bit about myself. I've been a Microsoft Data Platform MVP since 2011 and a friend of Redgate for almost as long. I wrote a book in 2015 called Developing Azure Solutions that is hitting its second edition this year. I'm also the chairperson of the San Diego Tech Immersion Group, which is a technical book club that meets every month. They meet at 6 p.m. San Diego time, so I had a meeting last night at 1:30 in the morning for 2 hours. So I apologize if maybe I don't look as fresh as I should, but I got plenty of sleep and I should be good to go. But I also have a unique role in San Diego. I'm co-chairman of the San Diego Software Architecture Group. Architects from all over Southern California meet once a month. They could be architects in Python, architects in Ruby or .NET or web or mobile or data, and they meet and they talk about software development, and I get to watch them write code. Often, I get to actually write code with them and share projects with them, which is a really unique opportunity. The reason why I tell you this is because as part of being a data platform MVP and part of being in the San Diego Software Architecture Group, I have observed great developers. I have had a wonderful time looking at the habits of great developers. I've watched how they code. I've watched how they think about software. I've watched how they think about their work and how they think about their life. And I've actually, as part of being a consultant, I've been a consultant for almost 20 years. I've seen bad developers, and I've seen average developers. And so it's kind of like what Tolstoy said, where he said, every happy family is the same, but every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. I have noticed similarities with great developers that they all have in common. And I've noticed that bad developers tend to have their own brand of dysfunction. So rather than talk about things that you shouldn't do, I've noticed a lot of talks in the past always talk about what you shouldn't do. They say, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that. If I talked about all the things that you shouldn't do, we could be here for 20 days, right, talking about all these different things. So instead of talking about what you shouldn't do, I want to focus on what you should do. I want to talk about the very few habits that I've noticed that great developers have in common. In addition, if I were doing like a David Letterman top 10 list, I would do it in reverse order to build suspense. I would say the least important thing first, and then I would build toward the most important thing. But I really don't want to do that because I've done webcasts enough and I've done YouTube videos enough to know that I probably only have your total attention for like the first 10 minutes. And so I want to tell you the most important thing I have to say first so that you can like go on Facebook or go check your favorite YouTube channel or whatever later and kind of zone out if I'm not that interesting. And the reason why I'm doing it in reverse order is because I want to be clear on something. I'm not doing this talk to be self-aggrandizing. I'm not doing it to sell more Redgate licenses. I'm only here because I want you to be a better developer and I want you to know the most important things right up front. This isn't a SQL internals lesson. It's not a best practices lesson. It's just a lesson to help you develop habits to become great developers. And I'm excited to watch you on your journey go from good to great. So if you have insight or you have questions, feel free to tweet me at Ike_Ellis and tell me those things. I'd be happy to answer those things with you. So without further ado, habit number 1 seems pretty basic. And a lot of you are looking at this like, are you telling me that the difference between great developers and bad developers is that we use source control? And I'm saying it is the most important thing you can do to distinguish yourself from being an average developer to a great developer. If you learn nothing else in my session today, but you have a renewed desire to use source control as frequently as you possibly can, I will consider that a great achievement. I would be thrilled if that's all that you learned today. I remember one time I had a friend and a client who is a technical leader. He had developers that reported to him, but he was not a developer. And he hired me to come in and do some evaluation, and he began it and said, look, Ike, I would like to fire all of my developers. what? You want to fire everyone? Like, this was like earth-shattering to me. Why would you want to do that? And he said, because they're terrible. He said, they miss deadlines. I never know what code they're writing. They have too many bugs, right? And I just think that I just need to get rid of all of them. And I said, look, you have great developers that work for you. Some of those developers are very skilled. Some of them I would love to work with. So they're not all bad. Like, you just need to keep the good ones. I agree that you do have some bad developers on your team. And I agree that maybe they need to be retrained or maybe even released to new opportunities. But I'm not positive that they need to just all get fired. And he said, well, I don't know how to tell the difference between my good developers and my bad developers. And I said, well, maybe it's you that should be fired. But he said, look, as a non-technical leader, how would you tell me, like, what metrics, what heuristics, what method would you use for me to distinguish my great developers from my bad developers? And I thought about that for a long time because, as a developer myself, I know when I'm with a great developer because I know my own skill set and I can see somebody who's obviously skilled and better than me. And I'm like, oh, I want to be like that person. But if I didn't have a development background, how would I do it? So I asked a bunch of questions to a lot of people trying to think about this and maybe give my friend an answer. And a lot of people had bad answers for me. They said, like, maybe great developers write less bugs than bad developers. Well, that wasn't my experience. I mean, I didn't see that. I saw a lot of great developers write plenty of bugs, actually. I heard somebody say, maybe great developers write more code than bad developers. And actually, I think bad developers write more code because they tend to copy and paste their code back and forth. And then I said, oh, maybe great developers always write the right code the first time. And I knew that wasn't true either. But I finally talked to my good friend and business partner, Scott Reed. And Scott said something interesting. He said, you know what? I bet I could tell the great developers from the bad developers almost solely by the amount of times they check in to source control. And I said, what do you mean, Scott? And he's like, I've just noticed that great developers, when they're about to do something dangerous, they check in first, they do something, they verify that it works, and they check in again. And so great developers tend to use source control maybe 8, 10, 12 times a day. And bad developers tend to check into source control once a day, once every few days, once a week, or not at all. Maybe they don't even use it at all. Well, what he said stunned me, and I really started thinking about that. So I started observing great developers' work, and sure enough, I noticed great developers use source control, and they use source control all the time. Check in, check in, check in, check in. So let's talk about what you do with SQL Server. Now, I'm not saying that you have to use source control the way I'm using source control. I'm just saying you have to use it. And whatever way you choose to use it, you have to use it. But this is one way where you can use source control. So let's say that I create a database that I call DevDB. And I just create that database right now. And now if I right-click on databases and I refresh, you'll see that DevDB database here. If I right-click, I can use Redgate source control. So this happened before, and I feel like it happens when my network changes. So hang on one second. Let me just open up SSMS again and go back to that database and link it to source control. Hang on one second. Boop. And it just takes a second to connect SSMS back to my server. OK. All right. OK. So I open up that, right-click on DevDB, yes. OK, so I can link that database to source control. So I right-click the database. I click Link to Source Control. I click Next. And then I have a database repository already pulled down from Get at this file path. And so I just go ahead and I click Link. And now that database is linked to source control, and it makes the database turn green. That's a Redgate feature that lets me know that that database is connected to the source control system. It could be GET, it could be TFS, it could be TFS and GET, it could be Subversion, like plenty of different source control systems you can use here. So if I open up tables, notice there are no tables in this database. So I right-click and I say, please get my latest changes from source control. it goes and sees all the tables, all the sort procedures, all the views, maybe even a little bit of data. And I can say, yes, I want to get all of those things pulled down into this new development database. I click OK, and now I've got all these tables just appeared for me. If I make a change, so now I'm going to do some development, right? I'm going to go in here to design, and I'm going to say, this customer's table needs an address field, and it's like varchar 50, right? Maybe I'll let nullables go in case there's any data in there eventually. I click yes to save it, and then once I click yes to save, it puts a little dot next to the database saying that I have uncommitted changes here. If I right-click and I say, please commit those changes to source control, it does a quick compare and it notices, oh, you have a change. And it highlights that change right here. It says, look, in development, I see an address, and in source control, I don't see an address, so that's what I'm going to push over there. So I say, like, add address. If I'm really awesome, I do a comment like, per my boss, Sarah, right, or whatever, and I do a work item number or whatever I'm going to do. I check the thing that I want to commit, I commit it, that change goes up, and now that change is free to pull down to everybody else using a development server. So that source control system that you just saw is simple, easy. You can do it. You can do this. This is very easy for you to do. And it gives you some benefits. Now you'll notice that the image that I use for use source control is Groundhog Day, right? And this is Bill Murray, who has to live the same day over and over again until he gets it right. And that's what source control does, is it lets you do the same thing over and over again until you get it right. And if you ever get it wrong, you just get to start over like Bill Murray did every day, right? So that's an awful lot of power. In addition to that power, which is useful even if you're by yourself. I know a lot of people don't use source control because they say, I'm a single developer. Like, why do I need to use it? Because I don't need to share with anybody else. But I'm telling you, you can use source control even by yourself, because you can use it for a catch in case you fall, like I just said. You can use it to get a history of the project so you know how it changed over time. You can use it to deploy from so that you know the code in source control is good and deployable. I mean, there's a lot of benefit here, and you should be using it. So, like I said, if you learn nothing else over the last next hour, but you learn that, and you get an inner kind of burning to recommit yourself to using it, I will be thrilled with that. But there's still a great habit coming, and that's habit 2. Test, test, and test again. This movie is from Elf, and that's he's testing Jack-in-the-Boxes every day, and he's always surprised at the results. I feel like when I run my database test, I'm always surprised at the results. That's an actual poster that you're seeing in front of you from my company. My company is a software company called Crafting Bytes, and we have that poster up on our wall in our conference room, huge. So when you walk into our offices, you see that, our developers see that, everybody sees that, because testing is a central part of our culture for our company. In fact, when my partner and I were going to start our company, we thought about calling it Test Double, because we thought it distinguished us from every other software company out there that we wrote all these tests. And we felt that automated testing, writing tests as developers, really made our software more stable, it preserved intent, and it made us write the right software at the right time. So I have noticed that SQL developers tend to not write automated tests. In fact, some of them even say that testing is not my job and I shouldn't have to test. I think those days are long past. I think testing is everybody's job, because testing is the way that we ensure that we did what we said we were going to do. And so testing allows us to verify that we're doing the right thing before we deploy over to production. So in SQL, we have a very easy way of writing tests. So what I can do is I can go back to that dev database that you watched me create. I can use a Redgate product called Redgate SQL Test. And I can say, please just add that dev database to be testable, and click OK. And now what's going to happen to that DevDB database is it's going to install an open source framework called TSQLT. You can use TSQLT right now. You can go to tsqlt.org and download it and use it. Now, I want to be very clear on something. I'm not telling you that in order to be a great developer, you have to use TSQLT. I'm not telling you that to be a great developer, you have to write tests the way I'm showing you to write tests. I am telling you that testing is your job, and you have to have an answer for it. So whatever you choose to do, you need to be testing. So if we click OK, and I know that's a bold statement, and I apologize if I'm a little preachy, but it is important. All right. So what that did, what it installed, is it created a bunch of objects for me. And it did it in the T-SQL-T schema. So it created a schema called T-SQL-T that had a bunch of different stored procedures that I can then use in my project. And what you do in T-SQL-T is you create two of your schemas. One schema where all your tests go, and you register that schema with T-SQL-T. And another schema is the target of what you're actually testing. So I have a T-SQL-T sample here that I also installed using the Redgate tooling called T-SQL-T example. And if I go into that database and I right-click and I do a new query, I can type in T-SQL-T.runAll and just run it. And it will go into my test schema and run every single individual test in that schema. And it will tell me the results of it. Now, if I scroll down, you can see that these are the tests that it decided to run. And then just a little bit further, it'll say, hey, you had 12 tests fail here. And if I go in here, I can look and see that, hey, some of these tests have been failing. Let's find a failing test right here. Test ready for experimentation is failing. Now, digging through all of this text is arduous. So another thing that I can do is go back into SQL tests that you saw before, open up that T-SQL-T example, and from here, I can just click the accelerator test and run those tests that are just in that schema. I get all green checkboxes. I see this red X. That tells me that test fails. That's what's great about this tool. I can double click it. This is awesome. It navigates me directly into the test that failed. Code navigation with SSMS by itself has traditionally been very difficult, but here it's very easy. When I see, now I could talk to you about what's actually happening here, but I don't want to spend a lot of time on how to write tests. We could do a 3-day class on how to write tests, and I could teach you all the different ways that at Crafting Bytes we write tests. But I just wanted to show you that this is possible to quickly write a test, quickly navigate into a failing test, and then navigate into what failed. So I can use SQL Prompt. SQL Prompt has a great feature called Script Object as Alter. I can click into that script, and I can see that what I actually have as a problem here is a boundary error. The test, by the way, was called Test Ready for Experiment if there are 2 particles. The boundary error says that I'm testing for more than 2 particles. I put an equal sign there. I execute. I go back to SQL test. I individually run that test by itself. I get a green checkbox. I've identified the bug, fixed the bug, verified the bug is fixed. I'm on my way, going to the next thing. So write tests. And you don't have to use T-SQL-T, but you do have to write tests. Testing is your job. It doesn't matter if you're a business intelligence developer, a data warehouse developer, a line transactional developer, writing an e-commerce site, you have to do testing. OK. So habit number 3, always be shipping. Now, this is another poster that we have at Crafting Bytes. You'll recognize Alec Baldwin from a famous movie called Glengarry Glen Ross. Alec Baldwin did a great lecture called Always Be Closing to salespeople. That lecture is laced with profanity, but what he does in that lecture is he tells salespeople what their real job is. He said, you might think your job is this, but your job is actually this. He gives an 8-minute monologue about that job for which he was nominated for an Academy Award. He was only in that movie for 8 minutes, doing one monologue, and he was nominated. So I would encourage you, if you have the stomach that can handle a few F words here and there, to watch that video on YouTube. But at Crafting Bytes, we changed the closing, that we photoshopped this, and we printed a poster called Always Be Shipping. And the reason why we made that poster was because we are emphasizing to our developers what their real job is. We call you software developers. We might call you programmers. But your job is not to write code. Your job is not to make the greatest recursive CTE function. Your job is not to create the most amazing windowing function. Your job is to ship software. And anything that distracts you from shipping software is something that maybe we should think about eliminating, right? So we want to ship all the time. We want to solve business problems all the time. Business is changing. Everyone's business is changing. My business, if you told me, Ike, it's 2010, what are you going to do in 8 years? I would have given you a bunch of guesses, and probably none of it would have been right. I mean, none of it. If I'd been lucky if I got 1 thing out of 10 correct, right? So that's my business. My tiny little business has changed that much in 8 years. Can you imagine businesses that are huge, that are trying to protect their market? They are in fear of losing their market because of how quickly business is changing. And so if business is going to change quickly, we have to change with it. And the only way we can change with it as fast as they want is to ship what they're asking for as quick as we could possibly manage it. So we need to be thinking about shipping software. I had a client named Benjamin, and let me tell you about the full story. So a client hired me to write a feature. So I wrote that feature, and I thought that feature was really good, and I wanted to get it in production. So I went to the team, and I said, okay, this thing's ready for production. And I said, what do I do to get this thing to go so everyone can use it, right? And they said, oh, that's Benjamin's job. Oh, that's Benjamin's job. So I'm like, oh, who's Benjamin? Let me go find him. So I go look, are you Benjamin? Are you Benjamin? Are you Benjamin? I finally find him. And I say, Benjamin, I've got a new feature. I want to ship it. And Benjamin says, oh, I don't want to do that until like April. I'm like, what? April? We don't have till April. He said, it's just so painful, and there's always problems, and it sometimes takes me 2 days to deploy a new version. I just don't like doing it, right? And I said, why is that? And he said, well, I'm just really prone to, sometimes things go wrong in the shipping of software, and I always get the blame even though it's not my fault, right? Diving into Benjamin's job, what I learned is that Benjamin did 100% of his job manually. And manual problems, just like Steve just said in the keynote, he said, when we do things manually, we tend to make human mistakes. And we need to have a DevOps story that makes things automatic. Now, I think that making a manual process automatic overnight is a very tall order. But what I think we can do is drive toward automating certain things in our shipping pipeline to make shipping easier for us. And if we make it easier and we get better at it, we tend to do it more. Now, I want to emphasize that last thing that I just said. The more often we ship, the better we will get at it. The better that we get at it, the more we will enjoy doing it, and the more we will do it. So I think what we need to do is, rather than that, the main problem, in my opinion, for that team was that when I went to the team and I said, how do I get this in production? They all said, that's Benjamin's job, right? That was the main problem. Because really, it's everyone's job to ship software. It's everyone's job to refine the pipeline, make it better, and get our changes to production as quick as possible. Okay, so I think I belabored the point, and I've been preachy enough. I told you that those first 3 habits were my most important. I'm a half hour into this, and I've given you the first 3. So you guys can go to Facebook or YouTube, but I hope you found enough value in what I've said to stick around for the remaining habits, because I think there are some good points here. And I hope you find that's true. So habit 4, code for resiliency, code for the cloud. So this is Terminator 2. I don't know if you saw this movie, but this guy was very hard to kill. And mainly, he was hard to kill because he was self-healing, right? And I've noticed that SQL developers have a very hard time thinking that maybe SQL will go down on them. Maybe they are so scared of SQL going down on them that they just prefer not to think about it, so they don't code for that possibility. So we should be aware that anything can go wrong, and we should be coding for that eventuality. So having coding standards, having good coding practices, sharing those coding practices with those developers, including error handling, try-catch error handling, which has been in SQL for many versions now, is often not in stored procedures, and yet it should be. We know that error handling should do flag, fix, or fail, right? We're taught that when we take our very first computer science course, right? So, but yet often I look in stored procedures and I don't see flag, fix, or fail. I see just like, we do this stuff and we hope it works, and if it doesn't, I'm sure the user will tell us, right? That's not an acceptable way to code, and it really is a good distinguishing characteristic between great developers and bad developers. Connection retry intervals, short transactions, those are all things that great developers should do. So one thing that SQL Prompt has that I think is amazing is if I go into just writing code, right? Let's just say that I have a new query here and I do an insert statement. Insert into, let me use the right database. I'll use that database. Into sales.customers. Now, SQL Prompt filled that out for me. But let's say that I used my bad habits and I just did a quick values insert into this table and I left the column list off. You'll notice that a green underline came underneath that code. That underline is happening from SQL Prompt code analysis, where it's saying insert without column list is a bad habit. Now it's saying it's a bad habit, but maybe I don't know why that's a bad habit. So if I click this blue circle here, it will describe this is why in years of SQL development we have learned that not including column lists is a bad habit. So you might not agree with this rule. Maybe I don't agree with the rule. But if I don't agree with it, I can actually turn that rule off. And the way I turn that rule off is if I go to SQL Prompt, Manage Code Analysis Rules, you will see all of these rules. Maybe it's a deprecated feature. Maybe it's just something that we've learned as a best practice over time. And if you don't agree with that one, you can just say, I don't agree. Insert without column list, turn it off. But these other ones I do agree with, and these other ones I want applied. If all of the developers on your team use SQL Prompt code analysis, you will find them creating more resilient, more cloud-friendly code over time. In addition, if I'm a junior developer and I don't know SQL at all, I can use code analysis as a training tool because as I'm writing bad code, it's contextually telling me, hey, Ike, you could be a better developer here. And I'm going to give you a green underline to prompt you toward being a better developer. And now I'm learning good habits as I'm writing code. That is enormously powerful. I think those of you who are .NET developers typically will use FXCop or ReSharper to make you better .NET developers. And those of you who are SQL developers should be using this to become better SQL developers. And I'm not, in the interest of full disclosure, Redgate does not pay me. I'm not a Redgate employee, and they give me no money. They pay a few travel expenses. They give me free software. But that's the extent of what I get from Redgate. So I'm telling you this not because I want you to buy it, but because I genuinely believe that this can make you a better developer. Okay, and hopefully you've got the sincerity there. And I didn't come off too like I'm from the Home Shopping Network or whatever they have in Europe. I don't know what they have in Europe, but okay. Habit number 5, always do the simplest thing. I don't know if you know what movie you'll notice that I've been using movies all the way through, right? So this movie is from The Shining. It's the poster of The Shining. And we also have this on our wall at Crafting Bytes. And it's bad definition in the graphic. It looks better on the poster, but it's a maze, and then we have an arrow cutting through the maze, reminding our developers to do the simplest thing. At Crafting Bytes, we do 4 and 6 week projects. And so our projects can be kind of expensive. I don't want to tell you maybe over the internet how much they can be, but we had somebody come to us with a project that was going to be 4 weeks long. Actually, it was going to be more than that, 4 to 8 weeks long, which we're a small company, so somebody coming to us with a 4 to 8 week project represents a significant portion of our quarterly revenue. And we were excited about that project. So we went and met with the customer, and the customer said, they gave us the requirements. They told us, I want the software project to do this, or I want it to do that, or I want it to do that. And after meeting with them for about 6 hours, we turned to each other and we said, you know what, I think that they want us to write Excel. I think I'm pretty sure what they're describing is Excel. And so we kind of just asked them, we said, why aren't you using Excel to do this? And they said, well, we have all these problems with Excel. We have this problem and that problem and that problem. We realized that their main problem was that they were using Excel as a database when they really needed to be using Excel for analysis. So we said, you know what, we can create a database for you, and we can put all this data in a database, and then we'll use Excel for what it's good at, which is pivot tables and formulas and things like that. So they said, yeah, we're willing to do that. So we created a database, populated it, gave them everything they wanted in 24 hours. We didn't write a single line of code, right? And we lost the 4 to 8 weeks of revenue, which was kind of sad for us, but we recognized that one of our core principles at our company was always do the simplest thing, and that was the simplest thing. So we try to do the simplest thing all the time. Some new features that Microsoft have released in the last few years, they've released Power Apps and Flow and Power BI. You can do amazingly complicated things with those tools without writing any code or very little code. So there are some things that you can learn to deliver simple solutions that will give you what you want. Habit number 6. Software development at its most fun is a team sport. When I was brand new in my career, I was hired by a software team that was going to write software for NASDAQ. And I was thrilled. I had never been asked to write software for anybody I'd ever heard of before. So I thought this was a great opportunity. We flew in to Phoenix, Arizona, where they rented a bunch of hotel rooms that were right next to each other. And they kept all of the developers in those rooms every waking hour of every day of the week for 6 weeks solid. We would literally code all day. Then we'd go back to our room and sleep. And then we'd code all day. And then we'd go back to our room and sleep. They would feed us. It was an amazing project. And I know that sounds exhausting and you wouldn't want to do that for a job. But I have never had more fun writing software than I did in those 6 weeks. It was an amazing synergy and energy, and I learned a lot, and these other developers were way better than me, and they were teaching me things like right in line, and we delivered on time, and NASDAQ used that software for years afterwards. So I've also been on teams where they gave me a desk over in a corner, and they gave me a laptop, and they said, you are going to write this product. And I'm like, okay, who am I writing it with? You're writing by yourself. So I would write all by myself, all alone. And even when the project was interesting, and even when I wrote good code, I was lonely. And being lonely is a terrible feeling. You just feel like nobody loves you. Nobody cares about the work you do. And when a project fails, you have no one to share the failure with. And when a project succeeds, you have no one to share the success with and celebrate with. And it's just a terrible feeling. So I have learned that great developers embrace their team. They share things with their team. They learn with their team. They realize that we succeed or fail together as a team. And they tend to really celebrate with the team when the team succeeds. So I think that we should all be part of a team. And if you have a job where you are writing software by yourself, I feel for you. I think even when you're an introvert, I know introverts out there are saying, I like being by myself. I like it when it's dark. I like it when no one talks to me. But when introverts report where they're happy, they actually report where they're also socializing. Even when it's uncomfortable and exhausting, they also report high levels of happiness. So with that, I want to share with you a habit that we've learned at Crafting Bytes. This is called mobbing. Actually, let me show you a picture of mobbing. So mob development is like pair development, but it's much wider. What you do with a mob is you can have 2, 3, 4 developers all writing the same code. What you're seeing in that picture is 3 different large LCD screens, and you're seeing one developer. The guy standing up at the standing desk is writing code, typing and moving the mouse, right? Navigating the IDE. The other 3 developers are watching him code and talking about what he's coding. It's very interactive. Maybe we should do this, maybe we should do that. Okay, now that we've got a plan, drive him toward where he needs to be. So the person at the keyboard is called the driver, and the people watching are called the navigators. And to keep everybody interested in the process, we rotate the driver every 15 minutes so that everyone gets a chance to drive. I was actually at this customer. This picture that you're seeing is not a picture. This is a picture that's at my customer, and that tank you're looking at is a live tank. At Crafting Bytes, we have a similar tank to that. At that customer, I was driving, which meant that I was at the keyboard. And actually, the guy in the back of the picture was navigating. He was telling me what to do. And that makes it very easy for the driver because I can just listen to him and go where he tells me to go, right? Kind of like if you're driving in a car, it's easier to drive when there's a navigator telling you where to turn, right? So when I was driving, a guy I'd never seen before walked up to me and said, "My turn to drive." And I was like, "Oh, okay." So I got off the keyboard and I let this guy, I didn't know, get on the keyboard and code. This guy, code, 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 code. And now he wasn't a very good coder, and we had to tell him what to write, but he did know the keystrokes. He knew Control-C, Control-V, Control-KC, Control-KD. He knew how to navigate F12, F5, F11. Like, he knew those shortcuts that you use in Visual Studio to get around code, but he just didn't know what to write, and he relied on us to tell him what to write, right? He wrote for a half an hour, stood up and said, "Thank you very much, that's all I needed to know," and walked away. This was a company, I can't tell you the revenue because we're webcasting, but a very high revenue company that's a market leader in its market. And that person that pushed me aside at that keyboard was the CEO. I didn't know that at the time, but I asked him, how often does the CEO do that? He said once a week he comes here and codes with the project he cares the most about for a half an hour. Now I'm going to ask you a question. Do you think that CEO learned a lot about the state of that project? Do you think the CEO was able to tell the developers, you're doing something wrong here, you need to do it like this instead? How many meetings would that CEO have to be in to learn what that CEO learned being part of that mob, writing software with that mob? He learned probably more in 30 minutes than he would in like 8 hours of meetings, right? So you can tell that mobbing is a very powerful thing, and what mobbing allows us to do is share information. It allows us to make junior developers senior developers because seniors can tell them what to do. It allows a domain expert who might know the business better than everybody else to share domain knowledge very quickly. And it allows senior developers to really not work as hard because senior developers spend a lot of time doing mundane things, and instead they can guide the mundane things while they're thinking of the more complex problem that needs to be solved later, right? I think I'm the first person to share this publicly, but SQL Prompt has a new feature called sharing code analysis rules. This settings file right here, your code analysis rules, can be saved as a CA code analysis settings file. That file can be loaded and saved and shared with the team. You can actually define your code analysis rules here, save them, check them into source control, have all the other developers bring them down so that everybody's on the same page for what rules they write to. Doing small things like this to share your best practices with the rest of your team will really distinguish you and make you become a great developer. You know, I had one other thing to mention about it being a great developer. There is a very senior person on this team, and there's a very junior person on that team. But you would never know it by looking at the code, because that's what mobbing does, is it holds the code to a higher standard so that the code is the right code written at the right time. And that's what we're really trying to get here, is the right code written at the right time so that it doesn't have to be redone because somebody wasted 2 days writing bad code, right? Okay. All right, habit 7, love your tools. You know, if you were going to hire a handyman on your house, would you hire the handyman who had all of his tools spread out the back of the pickup truck, rusted and rained on? Or would you hire the handyman who looked like they took good care of their tools, they understood them inside and out, they understood what tool did what for what job, and they spoke glowingly about their work and the craftsmanship of their work? So I like the name that we landed on at Crafting Bytes because I feel like we are craftsmen of software. And I feel like just like the carpenter relies on a good level or a good laser blue line or a good hammer, we rely on SQL Prompt and Visual Studio and SSMS. So I think it's important to just have this like strong feeling of attachment toward those tools. And I think it's important for you to like look at these tools and know what they do. Like you should know what SQL prompt does. If you pull down SQL prompt, do you know what insert semicolons does? Do you know what remove square brackets does? These are options that you've always had. One of my favorite SQL prompt, pardon me for the but one of my favorite SQL prompt features, and it is actually, it's probably my very favorite one, is right here. Okay. This code right here is prettified code from SQL prompt. And it might be ugly code, right? You might think, oh, look, like this is subqueries that are all being joined together. But how often have we seen subqueries look like this, where somebody has embedded all the subqueries on one line? And how often have we seen join clauses come right after the join? And when developers write code like this, you tend to spend an awful lot of time formatting code and not a lot of time writing code. So in SQL prompt, just doing Control-KY and having it auto-format to be pretty again is enormously powerful. So that's one SQL prompt feature that I use all the time, and it saves me, probably at least a half hour to a couple hours every day as I help other people write better code. That's one feature. Another feature that we can do in SQL prompt is, let's say that I created a stored procedure. Like I said, get orders, create proc, get orders at cust ID, integer, right? And I just say as select star from sales.customers, where cust ID equals at cust ID. And I might even do multiple. I might say select star from sales.orders, where cust ID equals at cust ID, right? Okay. Now, right now, that's bad code, and SQL prompt's already telling me it's bad code. It says right here, procedure body not enclosed in begin end. Well, that's important. So maybe I need to add that, right? Or maybe this asterisk in the select list, and if I hit that blue arrow like you saw before, it tells me why that's a problem, right? Okay, so I can go ahead and create that procedure. Now, I might look at this code and say, you know what? What I want to do is, instead of having two queries be returned, instead what I want to do is just script this out and refactor it into a different style, right? And so what I can do when I want to do that is, if I pull down SQL prompt, I can say, please encapsulate that code as a new stored procedure. When I click that, I can name the stored procedure, get only orders. I can click next, and then view the script. And what it did was it took the code that I highlighted, it put it right here in a new stored procedure. It named the stored procedure what I wanted it to be named, and then it put the call into the original stored procedure with the same argument there. So it preserved the original intent of the stored procedure I'm changing, and it gave me a new one that's smaller and easier to kind of manage. That made this stored procedure easier to test, easier to change, easier to put into production. So that kind of refactoring and the code navigation between the refactoring is really, really powerful and a great feature of SQL prompt. So those are just 2-3 quick features of SQL prompt that you can use right now that would make you a better developer. There are plenty more, but those are 3 of my favorite. Okay, you ready for another habit? Oh, last thing about love your tools. SSMS does great things. Profiler does great things. Extended Events does great things. Excel is a great tool for every DBA to validate their data and understand that if their data has issues. All of these tools you should probably know, and there's plenty more that you should probably know, actually. Okay, habit 8. Just like Rocky is fighting Ivan Drago, great developers fight dependencies. Now, this I've noticed, particularly in the SQL ecosystem, that we are filled with dependencies. So let me clearly define what a dependency is. If you change code and you go to deploy and you realize that you need to change a whole bunch of other things in order to get that code into production, you probably have a dependency. A good example of that is if I go into a database and I delete a column, and I'm worried about that delete breaking my application, that means that my application is dependent upon that column. And that means that that application needs to change with the database. Even worse than that would be a dependency that's external to my team. Imagine I delete a column and another software team that is in a different building that has a different boss complains that I deleted a column. That means that that team is reliant on that column in that database. Now, if that would stop me from making that change move to production, I have a very severe dependency. And what I've noticed is a lot of the time in database development, we don't pay attention to dependencies. They collect and collect and collect and collect, and those dependencies tend to be a significant portion of our technical debt that will stop us from shipping. So I don't think it's possible for you to remove all the dependencies in your code. But what I think it is possible to do is to make those dependencies much smaller than they are today. And I think it's possible to recognize what you're going to do about them and to get them to be smaller and more manageable so that you ship software more frequently. If you don't manage dependencies, you will hit something called changelog in your software projects. What changelog is this. If you ask me, hey, Ike, I want you to write a piece of software for me, and you say, hey, I want the software to do this. And okay, I can do that. So I start coding, and I flip my laptop around and I say, hey, do you want it to do this? And you say, yeah, that's what I want, except maybe these 3 changes. I'm like, okay. I flip it back, code. You mean like this? Yeah, like that. And you're thinking to yourself, Ike is the best software developer I've ever seen. I ask him to make a change, he changes, shows me, and delivers. That is amazing. That's exactly how software should be written, right? But what we find is, over time, so this x-axis on this chart you're seeing is time. So a month into the project, 6 months into the project, 10 years into the project, as you ask me for changes, I start reacting more slowly to those changes. So what used to take me an hour or 4 hours is now taking me a couple days or a week or a month or a quarter. And you're thinking, why can't I get the Ike I used to have, where when I asked for a change, he delivered? Now I have this Ike that doesn't want to return my emails because he's too embarrassed that he can't do what I asked him to do, right? So I want the old Ike back. Well, what made me go from being able to change something quickly to being able to change something and it taking much longer period of time? And the answer to that is my own success. Because that application got noticed. And the CFO said, hey, there's data in that application I want to see. So can I look at the data? And I said, oh, I'm not super comfortable with that. Maybe can I just give you a CSV with the data? No, I want it in real time. And so somebody says, well, let the CFO put Excel against that database. What a terrible idea. Because now that CFO is going to build Excel models and reports and charts and try to end the month and have essential procedures about ending the month against my database. And now when I notice that there's a column I want to change and I put it in production, the CFO calls me immediately and says, what did you break? Because now my models don't work. Now I have hit a stumbling point that stops me from delivering to somebody. That is changelog. And as changelog grows, I start wanting to change my software less and less and less. So if you would like to fight changelog, you need to, number 1, fight dependencies, and number 2, include testing and simplify your code. If you do those 3 things, actually, you will find that your software is changeable, easier to manage, easier to test, and ultimately easier to ship, which was our habit number 3, always be shipping. So I've told you what to do, but how do you do it? Well, you fight dependencies by never allowing direct access to your tables to anybody that's not on your team. I know that's a hard thing to say, but I'm including BI guys, ETL people, I'm including report authors, I'm including the CFO. I know she wants data. But we've got to be able to give her data in a way that's decoupled from our tables. I also know that many of you are in changelog right now and are feeling the pain of it right now. The reason why I know you're in changelog, by the way, is because when I look at your databases, I see empty tables or tables that have data in it from 2007. And I say, hey, all those tables with old data in it, let's just delete those because it's ugly and it makes it hard to find the good data. And you say, no, don't delete those. Don't delete those. Or another example is, I look at a table with 300 columns, and maybe 100 of them are all nulls, empty. Why are they there? Because somebody wrote a feature that nobody ever used, right? And I say, hey, there's too many columns here. Let's delete 100 of these. And you say, no, don't delete any columns because that makes the CFO angry, or it makes the report authors angry, or it breaks our application in ways that we don't understand. That will tell you that you have a dependency that needs to be addressed and removed because it's stopping you from deleting columns that nobody uses, deleting tables that are empty, and removing things that are just cluttering up and just weeds in the garden, right? We need to weed the garden and have a beautiful garden. Okay, so how do we fight them? I was going to circle back to that. You fight dependencies by using views. Even getting somebody on a view and not directly querying your table is what you're doing when you do that is decoupling the dependency from your underlying table. And even that is powerful. I would prefer you use an ORM in your applications like Dapper or Entity Framework. I prefer that you have a good enterprise data architecture where reporting is happening in an ODS or a data mart or a data lake someplace and not happening on transactional systems. I prefer that we look at every single item that stops us from shipping frequently and we scrutinize that item and determine, do we have a dependency and what are our options to get rid of it? One of the most common places I see dependencies are in something that SQL developers love to do. They love to create 3-part and 4-part database names. You know what a 3-part name is. It's database, schema, object. Those 3-part names will stop you from shipping. Because imagine that I have a database called inventory where I keep all of my products and where they are. And I need an emergency feature to the product database. And when I go to deploy it, somebody says, don't do that because we can't deploy inventory without also deploying the warehouse application. Oh, that right there, when they say we can't deploy this without that, that tells you right there we have a dependency. And when we say, why can't we deploy them separately? They'll say, because inside the database of warehouse, they're querying our tables using 3-part names. And that's how that dependency got created. So I'm blaming the mechanism. 3-part database names are a great indicator that you have a dependency with a separate database. Now those 2 databases have to always be on the same server. If they have to go to the cloud together, they have to get upgraded to SQL 2016 or 2017 or 2020 together. And if one team says, we can't upgrade because we haven't tested it yet, the other team can't upgrade. That is a bad problem. So if you have things like that that are stopping your progression, now you know where to look. Even worse than a 3-part name is a 4-part name, because what's included in the 4-part name? The server. Now what you've done is instead of locking 2 databases together, you've locked 2 servers together. And those servers can't move unless they move together. And those servers can't be upgraded unless they're upgraded together. And they can't be deployed unless they're tested together. You've widened the surface area of your testing, and you've hindered your ability to produce good code and put it in production. Okay, I get preachy on that one because I find that when I'm in a room of like 300 DBAs, they look at me like, no 3-part names, you're crazy, Ike. They want to go grab the pitchfork, so I have to defend myself. So I apologize if I preemptively defended myself when you're like, why is he so upset? I was like, I watch you, you're like screaming at the screen. He's wrong on that, but I promise you, I think I've got a point. Give it a minute to think about it. Okay. Habit number 9, question, reevaluate, and act. So when I was a new .NET developer, I noticed that I could have null fields in my database, but I noticed that .NET didn't handle nulls very well. And so because the null values were coming into .NET and breaking it, and it was requiring a lot of code to work around it, I just made a decision. I said, no more nulls in the database. I just made a command decision, no nulls. And so I would tell my teams this, hey, no nulls in the database, use defaults instead, no nulls, no nulls. Then .NET 2 was released, .NET 3.5. Years later, I said to a junior developer, hey, no nulls in the database. And he's like, why? And I said, oh, it's just too difficult in .NET. He's like, well, but we have nullable types. Look, we can have a type with a question mark. I knew this. I knew we had nullable types. I was using nullable types in my application. What I didn't do was I didn't make the connection that my original decision to not have nulls in the database was affecting the way I wrote .NET code. I had made a decision. I made the decision permanently, and I never questioned it again. And it made me a worse developer. I've done that many times in my life in many different areas. I could tell you plenty of life stories where I held on to bad decisions for far too long. But I'm telling you that great developers always question their previous decisions, even when a junior developer points it out to them. So a great developer will say, like, why did I make that decision? Bad developers will say, well, we tried that already and it didn't work, so we're not trying it again. Anybody who says, we tried it already and we're not trying it again, is telling you right away they might not be the best developer that they can be. But if you want to be a great developer, when somebody says, hey, you know what, you should put your database in source control. And if you say, oh, we tried that already, we're not going to do that again, stop and say, wait a minute, has anything changed? Maybe the products have gotten better. Maybe the tooling is more mature. Maybe our culture has shifted so that it would work now. So question those preconceived notions and those longly held opinions. Question your derived answers and come up with new answers. And then change your mind, change your behavior, and ideally become a better developer than you were last year. Habit 10, leave it better than you found it. Oh, by the way, I meant to mention this. On habit 9, question and reevaluate, I mentioned this is the Sixth Sense still, because you can't watch the Sixth Sense twice the same way you watched it the first time. Because you're going to question what you learned, right? And that's going to put everything that you see through a new lens. Great developers tend to do that. On habit 10, leave it better than you found it, that is obviously Back to the Future. That's Marty McFly. And I think that he left the 1950s better than he found it, right? He had some stumbling, but when he left, he ensured that he left it better than when he got there. This is another poster that's on the wall at Crafting Bites. And it's to remind the developers and remind me that in everything I do, whether it's writing code or interacting with an employee or talking to a customer or my wife or my son, that I want to leave everything better than I found it. If everyone in society obeyed this one rule, imagine the world we would live in. So as it applies to coding, I have an employee who is better at this than I am. His name is Jason Rollins. We call him J-Raw. And J-Raw, I always know when he's been in code because it has greatly changed from the last time I saw it. And it's mostly because when J-Raw sees a really long stored procedure, he sees like a 5,000 line stored procedure, he says, I'm not going to leave it like this for the next person. I'm not just going to do a quick fix and move on. I'm going to take this and make it testable, make it manageable, clean it up, and I'm going to leave it better than I found it. And I love working with J-Raw because I know that every single time I work on one of his projects, it's going to be better than the last time I saw that code. Great developers look at those areas of code that nobody wants to fix, and they fix it. And they make it so that the next time they are in that code, they're grateful that they were there previously. It's like the ability to say to past Ike, thank you, past Ike, for making present Ike's life better. And I'm going to pay that forward by making future Ike's life better, by making this code even better today than it was yesterday. One of the ways that we make code better is we fight dependencies. We see a 3-part name and we think about ways we can get rid of it. We see a 4-part name and we think about things we can do to get rid of it. And we implement those thoughts. Okay. Habit number 11. This is the Ghostbusters car. And you know what they're doing. They're flying out of their headquarters and going on a call, right? All 3 cars are going out, right? And they are responding urgently to a call, right? And they get paid. So somebody's paying them to respond quickly, right? Okay. As developers, we tend to not gauge our users' needs with the same sense of priority that we gauge our own needs. And I want to just take a second and think about how our developers view us, or pardon me, how our users view us. So a user views us as kind of a magician because they don't know how to write code, right? They don't know how to go into SSMS, right? They don't know how to make a stored procedure work. They just know that they need a job that they need to get done, and they rely on us to get that job done. And so when they email us, when I interview users and I ask them what their complaints are about developers, you know what their number one complaint is? They don't answer my emails. They don't pick up the phone. That's their number one complaint. So notice that habit 11 is not respond immediately, because I don't believe that. I don't believe that you have to respond to every single email at the minute it's sent. But what I do think that you should do is, when the user's tone is urgent, we should replicate that tone when we respond to them. Often what the users want to hear is, I heard you. I understand your needs, and I will help you fix those problems. You might, even if you told them, I can't get to this till Friday, or I can't get to this till May, at least they know that you heard them and that you're going to address what they said, right? So we respond with urgency because we're trying to build trust with our users. And we value the trust that we have with our users as much as we value our own skills, or the trust we have with our boss, or the trust we have with our family. So maybe not quite that bad. Maybe I overstated that, but you get the idea. So we look at habits that build user trust, and we can do things like we can repeat the same mistake over and over again, and ask ourselves, if I repeat the same mistake, will I build trust or will I drop trust, right? We can have half-done code that isn't tested, where we deploy it and it only does half what they asked us to do. Would that build trust or erode trust, right? We can have missed deadlines and bad listening skills. We can not read the entire email, maybe only read one line of the email, and answer that one line, but not the 3 other things they addressed, right? Or what we can do is we can do what we said we would do when we said we'd do it. We can dig deeper to empathize with them and understand their problems, and we could help them do their work with them and not for them. Bad developers tend to hear a problem and say, I know a better way, and write it without talking to them. Great developers tend to say, you and I are in this together, and we're going to solve this problem together. And that makes someone feel a little less lonely, a little more like a teammate, and a little more like a peer instead of somebody that they're being condescended to. Okay, so I gave you the 11 habits. I have 6 minutes left. I have a couple of more habits that I think is bonus material for you. The first bonus habit is love your language. Now, I could talk all day on how much you should love T-SQL. I love T-SQL. But I want to tell you a story from Brent Ozar. Brent Ozar is another MVP and a popular speaker, and I'm sure plenty of you know him. At the last PASS Summit, which was held in November last year, he gave a pre-con about performance tuning, and he had hundreds of people in his pre-con that paid good money to hear him speak. And Brent said, how many of you are using column store indexing or in-memory structures? And he said just a very few people raised their hand. Now, I don't want to call these people out, right? And I don't want to insult anybody or make fun of anybody that happened to be in that pre-con. But I want to talk about what happened there. Hundreds of people sacrificed their time and money to go to a pre-con on performance tuning, and the majority of them were not implementing features that had been in SQL Server for 1, 2, or 3 versions. Why was that? Was it because, to me, I think that every data warehouse should be using column store indexing. I think that every ETL author should be using in-memory structures. I think that a lot of these features that I have on this list should be being used by business intelligence and transactional developers. And I can give you time after time I've seen bad code. If I go back to SSMS and we look at we look at like TriCast here. So this is me creating a table called T1. And that T1 table has a column called col1, which is varchar 100. And if I add a bunch of numerics and a bunch of text there, I add 12 records there, I can cast that as an integer. And when I cast that, I get a famously terrible error that T-SQL has had forever and SQL Server's had forever, and I've hated it. It says conversion failed when converting the varchar value Ike to data type int. Does it tell me what column? No. Does it tell me what row? No. Does it give me any help in that error for me to troubleshoot that issue and get that data clean and ready to go wherever I'm trying to use it? No. But instead of using cast, which I see all the time, since SQL 2012, so what is that, 2012, 2014, 2016, new version coming out, 4 versions, we've had TriCast, and yet I hardly ever see anybody do it. What does TriCast do? It runs the cast and says, if you can't cast, I'll just respond with null. Null, I can't cast. At least that null tells me what row and column was the problem, and I can go hunt for that. So there's try-convert also that you can use. Another T-SQL feature that I think is really important is concat. Imagine that you're being asked to concat a bunch of fields together for like an address book or something like that. And you concat, you concat looking like this. Let's just pull that result set up. And it looks like it works. The concat works, except every once in a while, you have nulls in your data set. Why? Because when you concat a null, you return a null. So I'm getting nulls back here. Now, why am I getting nulls back? Well, it's because one of these fields allows a null value, and I don't know which one. So the old way of coding was for me to decorate my code with isnull, 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 isnull. And it makes really ugly code, but it does solve the problem. Notice no more nulls in the data set. So what I do with isnull is I say, if you find a null, give me an empty string, cat that, right? That worked, OK. But that ugly code is terrible. Instead, SQL 2012, 4 versions now, we have concat. Concat says, give me everything you want to concat. If I see a null, I'll return an empty string. This code is easier to maintain, easier to read, doesn't decorate the code with terrible isnull, and does the exact same thing. There, I've given you 2 things that I commonly see don't happen. Some of my favorite 2016 features are drop if exists. Instead of doing an if check when you want to drop a table, you can drop if exists. In addition, SQL Server 2016 has support for R and Python. I think those are languages worth learning. These are just some window functions. I was just talking to Kathy, another MVP you're going to hear today, and she says, I wrote the book on window functions, and I did do sessions on window functions, because even though we've had them forever, hardly anybody's using them. So if you don't believe me, listen to Brent, listen to Kathy, and learn some of these new features that will make your life easier and better. But more importantly than that, develop a love for your language. It'll make you a better developer and worth more. Last bonus habit. Steve said this in his keynote. He said, we could have a culture where this is important to us or a culture where it's not. I'm paraphrasing because I didn't write down the exact quote. But that word, culture, is important. Particularly, it's important when dealing with high performance and high security applications. High performance and high security applications are never made by accident. I've never said, well, my team didn't really intend to have a highly secure application, but it turns out we did it all right. Now it's secure. And my team didn't intend to conform to GDPR, but we are doing it now. Magically, without even trying, we did it. That team does not exist. If you want high performance, if you want security, if you want conformity to standards, that is done because it permeates all your conversations. It's included in all your stand-ups. It's included as work items on your Kanban board. It's just part of your culture. And that's it, you guys. If you liked some of those posters that you saw me make, I am creating laptop stickers that I'm going to randomly give away. And if you want a laptop sticker that has one of these poster principles on it, go to www.craftingbytes.com, and on that homepage, you will see a sign-in. And if you sign up, you'll be entered for a drawing. I think I might even give stickers to almost everybody. I just don't want to commit to that in case there's 1,000 of you that sign up. But if there's like a few hundred of you, I might just send them to everybody. Who knows? But listen, I am very grateful for your time. I know your time is valuable. I know that tuning into a webcast means a commitment from you, and I'm grateful that you gave me this opportunity to share with you some principles that I found valuable. Thank you very much, and I hope to see you again soon.